Hey everyone, Brian Porter here. Welcome back to the Tonecast. We've been having a great time, as we've mentioned in the last couple shows, of just doing the interviews, and we're on the interview train again with my friend Hank from Rattlesnake Cables, one of my favorite companies in the gear industry and one of the companies that builds just amazing quality stuff. Built to last. We use them in the shop all the time. And I just wanted to have him back on the show because we've had him before, and he's someone that I just really respect and actually enjoy talking industry with all the time. We're jumping on the phone from time to time to just talk about different things. And so that's what we're going to get into in this conversation. We're going to kind of let you behind the curtain. And before we jump into that interview, I just want to mention our pickup chooser. I'll include a link to that below. This is something we mention in almost every podcast. Sometimes we forget, but this is a form. You can go just fill it out on our website. It's right up there at the top in the navigation. Fill that out. That gives me or Marco or anyone else here a chance to get to know your rig and what you're looking for, and kind of just tell us what's missing. Tell us what kind of sound you'd like out of the guitar. Tell us what kind of guitar you have, and we'll match you up with something from our lineup. That's the way we design things, and that will make it very easy for us to write you a prescription, if you will. So I'm excited for this conversation with Hank, and enough of the intro. Let's get into that conversation right now. Okay, so I'm on with my good friend in the guitar industry, Hank of Rattlesnake Cables. Hank, what's going on today?
Hey man, thanks so much for having me on the show. Excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I know that we've been talking about having you back on the show for it feels like months, and circumstances and timing just haven't worked out. But now we're here, and I'm glad that the record button is on, and we're we're making this happen. So how are you, man?
Awesome. I'm good. Yep. Busy, but good.
Very cool. Well, let's just jump right into it. So for those who don't know, Rattlesnake Cables is definitely one of our favorite brands here at Porter. So I can put the stamp of approval. I'm not even sure if that's worth anything, but it is. It's something that we just enjoy. The cables, we use them quite often here in the shop, in the showroom, and I know Marco's got some that he uses on his personal rig, and so I just love to hear kind of your 5-minute spiel, or could be 30 seconds, just kind of about your company real quick, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think when I have a spiel for Rattlesnake, it just always comes down to we're a bunch of musicians here in Missoula, Montana that make high quality cables. We take pride that we use U.S. milled cable. It's not a third party cable, and we have a connection with our customers that's very important. So we always feel like, having a great cable is priority number one, but also having a connection with the company that builds you things is also very important. I think a lot of musicians like to have that connection with brands and connection with people behind the brands. And that's why I love doing podcasts, and I love reaching out to our customers and talking to them that way. But I think that's really all it is. It's about a quality product, high quality instrument cable, and pretty awesome customer connection base.
Very cool. I think that's one of the things I respect most about what you guys do, is that it is about the product and the quality of the product, and that's always been evident and forefront in what you do. And I feel like that's it shouldn't be rare in the industry, but it seems like it is, because everyone's kind of trying to get the marketing cart before the product horse sometimes, right? They're trying to just get it out there, but they're not focusing on the quality. And I think that's probably, looking from the outside, I would say that's contributed to your success, is your customer service, but also just the fact that your cables are awesome, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's definitely it's an equal thing. A lot of people want rapid growth real fast, and they'll do whatever it takes to get that. And when they do that, it becomes a trend, or it's the hot item of the week, or the hot product, or the hot whatever. And that's great. I mean, I would love to have most exciting cable ever built, and everyone goes nuts for it. But I always like to think about slow growth. I think building a really great foundation, and that is where you have to have, the quality of the product is a given. That should be not even thought about. Right. That should be just number one, right? Mm-hmm. And so everything else behind it is customer support, how that product is presented, how that experience is buying it and using it. Those are all slow growth moves on getting a customer base. And I think that's where we've always, from day one, started with that kind of philosophy of go for just steady, solid, foundational growth versus, well, I'm just going to try to figure out how to, beat the market or the industry and come up with, crazy stuff all the time and start with that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess take me back to when did you start the company, and what year was it, and kind of what was your first give me your first couple products or kind of how did you get off the ground? Like this idea to make cables comes to your head, and take me through that first steps.
So Rattlesnake, this is, I think, our 12th year. It gets fuzzy until like August or something. I'm like,
it got really fuzzy around 2020 too, didn't
it? Yeah, for sure. So 12 years ago or so, maybe let's go like 13 or 14 years ago, I was a musician in bands, and I was also a pretty severe electrical nerd, but novice, extremely novice, and really excited about a soldering iron and schematics. And I was originally building pedals. I was building kits from GGG and General Guitar Gadgets and build your own clone. And then I got to the point where I was actually etching circuit boards with ferric acid and getting blanks of circuit board material, drilling them all out on drill press, all my contact points. And I was really, really interested in building pedals. That was the thing. And I was building quite a few for local musicians around town. And it was also quite frustrating because it was a lot of work and time, and every build was almost oh wow, it worked kind of feeling where like 99% like it sort of works, and then I have to like figure out what I did wrong and then undo it. So the troubleshooting was always super frustrating. Like I said, I was just learning, and every build I was getting better, understanding things a little easier, and getting a little faster. And for whatever reason, I thought it would be fun to just make a cable for myself. And I was thinking, okay, this should be really easy. It's only 4 solder points on a cable, the shield and the tip on both ends. Should be a piece of cake. I mean, the last pedal I built had 100 so contact points. It should be a breeze. And I just got some cable material, got some plugs, and I plug in my guitar and it doesn't work. And I'm like, what is going on? And I find out I got a cold solder on one thing. I fix it, plug it back in, still doesn't work. Undo that. And the other set had a cold solder. And it was quite the humbling moment where I was like, oh, I only have to do this 4 times. It's really easy. And then I realized, oh, there's actually a little bit more to it than I thought. And just as far as technique and time and how much solder versus little contact pads on a pedal. And when I started figuring that out, I had a great cable. It was awesome. And I was kind of knowing or learning about capacitance. So I was testing all these different cables just to see, like, can I hear the difference? Can I feel the difference? And by doing that, I was starting to kind of build my recipe. Like, this is the capacitance that I want to hit. These are the features that I want. This is the thickness of the cable. This is like the plugs I like. And that's what started developing the initial concept of selling cables. And then when we came up with the name Rattlesnake, and I took it to a band practice, and immediately there was our bass player was like, hey, what's that? And I was like, it's a new cable. Not really thinking that was going to be an easy sell compared to a pedal. I thought this would be just a side hustle along with the pedals. And he asked if, I can make him a cable. And I was like, sure. Made him one. And then, suddenly everyone in the band wanted one. And then other bands wanted one, associated bands.
Sure.
And then when it started getting weird was I was starting to get phone calls from a friend of a friend of a friend that I don't even know this person.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, I heard you make cables. Can you make me 2 cables of blah, blah, blah. I was like, wow, this is really, I'm not even trying to sell these. I don't have a Facebook page yet. I don't have anything. I'm not even literally trying to spread the word. It's just automatically kind of developing on its own. And that's where I thought, this might be something if people have this much interest around cables around Missoula. And really what it came down to, I think, was just the under-education, I would say. That might be a stretch to say that, but of the importance of a cable and a quality cable. So I was guilty of that for probably 20 years of my music career. I'd get the cheapest cable, plug it in, it's good to go, whatever. But until I actually plugged in a decent cable and I can actually feel it, hear it, and connect with it, then I was like, oh, wow, this sounds different than all my other cables. And I think that's one of those aha moments a lot of musicians will go through. And it's just ironic because, you spend $2,000 on a guitar and $3,000 on a high-end amp, and you got a $5 cable connecting the two.
Right.
And, you're buying a new one every other month and thinking that's just part of your, consumable accessory, like strings or picks, is cables. And when you come to the realization, like, no, that cable can last you a lifetime and be great, might as well just upgrade to something of quality and not have to buy one every other month.
Yeah. It actually ends up being a practical purchase, even though maybe it's like the initial thing is like, well, why is this one, 60 or 70 versus this one is, like you said, $10 or something. And I know that you do some stuff with the outside of the cables, and maybe talk about that real quick, just because I noticed that right from the start, certainly kind of like fits with the Rattlesnake name. It kind of looks like a snake, but more than that, it doesn't get all bunched up and like coiled up in the wrong way, if that makes sense. And that was the thing I noticed right away. I mean, I could tell it was quality made. I could tell it sounded great, but it was the outside that it was just like, man, this is actually thought out. It's not just a look thing to tie in with the name. There's some functionality behind it. So talk about that.
Yeah, polyweave has been around forever. I mean, we definitely didn't invent that concept of polyweave on top of a cable, but that was, it's designed to, everything about the cable is about protecting the cable. And when you skimp on cable protection, that's where you start running into cable failure. So cable protection would be a weave on the outside that prevents kinking and binding, like what you're talking about. Polyweave is great versus a cloth weave because it's stain and burn resistant. Also, it's also fray resistant. If you break one of the fibers in the polyweave, it doesn't all just ravel like a sweater does. Obviously, if you really just shred it, and it probably would. But if you have a couple cuts in it, it'll just hold up that shape. And then other protection items are, strain. We have like overplug strain relief. That's the shrink tube on the outside. And then when you start talking about the anatomy of a cable, where things are important internally, we use 20 gauge conductor in the center, which is often a bigger conductor than most cables. And then we also have a braided internal copper shield, and that also protects the cable from RF frequency leaking and all that. When people talk about why is your cable more expensive than the $5 cable, it always comes down to copper. So a cheap cable is going to have the least amount of copper. It's not like an arbitrary, they all cost $5 and I decided to, make massive profit and sell ours for a high amount. It's, we have way more copper in our cables, and copper is expensive. And the cheap cables will use the smallest gauge conductor. It's like a hair inside of there. They'll use a spiral wrap that maybe has 30 or 40% coverage instead of 95 like ours. And, that's where you'll have like broken shield issues, or you get radio through your cable. And, just like a paper clip, if you're bending it over and over, you're going to break it. And a smaller conductor gauge will tend to break easier than a thicker conductor gauge.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the copper thing, right? I mean,
the
price of
copper.
Oh yes. And I use like the thin stuff, but 10,000 wraps of it or whatever. And that's the thing. It's, people are like, well, why is this so expensive? It's like, man, the price of copper, we use probably like 8 or 9 different gauges and coatings of copper. And we've got to buy big spools of every single one to keep them in stock to make the variety of models that we make. And that costs a lot of money. And sometimes when you buy it, the spool is, 20% more, and then sometimes it's 20% cheaper. And we buy from places that do a terrible job of spooling the wire. So when we're pulling off the turns of wire, your 8,000 turns into a 10,000 turn pickup and it snaps, then you got to cut it. Yeah. You got to cut it and start it over. So I'm with you on the copper thing. It's definitely not cost inducive sometimes, but it is the right tool for the job. That's for sure. Sure. So I'm thinking about, we just did a recent post, kind of a memory post of our 2020 NAMM show, and that's a show that we were both at. We both had booths at the show. It was kind of, for both of us, kind of a bigger jump into the public eye, and not that people don't know about our companies, but more of a just in person, both of our bigger in-person events. So talk to me about the 2020 NAMM show, and obviously we had no idea. The world was already on fire, and at one point it was going to blow up here, like right after we returned from the show, or not long after we returned from the show. So talk to me about kind of that NAMM experience, and then kind of just tell me a little bit about the 2020 as things started getting really weird in the industry and the world.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, when you're talking here, I'm just literally having like flashbacks.
Sorry for the PTSD.
I'm trying to. I would love to maybe focus in on some of the positive things. Sure. So I think the first thing about 2020 that was really good about NAMM, was that your first one also?
Yeah, well,
or you been there before?
We did like a summer NAMM a long time ago. We shared a booth. And so it was kind of this was like the first big boy show on our own kind of thing.
Gotcha. So that was our first really. I mean, we've done. Yeah, that was I would say our first show ever. We've done like little tiny things in Missoula, but we've never did anything of that magnitude. And before and during Rattlesnake, I was always a part of this blog called the Flex Bay. And we would just talk to basically what you're doing, but more in a blog format, right? So I would talk to industry, specifically pedal builders. And so I've been, very understanding of NAMM, the process and the excitement of NAMM. And then in 2017, I was a guest for Fuzzrocious. So Ryan from Fuzzrocious, we got them cables. And then, he called me up and said, hey, if you guys want to go, or you want to go to NAMM, I'll get you a guest pass and check it out. And I was like, oh, wow, I think that might be a good opportunity. And I've talked about this in other podcasts and interviews in the past, but I'm born and raised in Montana. I spent 1 year of my life, I lived in LA, and that was it. But my entire time in Montana, there's always this very major imposter syndrome complex. And there is also a major feeling that nothing of any quality or value can come from the state, from the perspective of what I was doing. So bands, everything outside the state was cooler. I was in freestyle and skateboard. All the freestylers and skateboard people, way better in California and Seattle. Mm-hmm. Everything I wanted to do was very much felt inferior right out of the gate compared to, like, I would just say, well, if I lived in LA, I could do this. Or if, I started a business in New York, I would be hanging out with, these great whatever in New York and elevator game. And when I talk to builders and friends and whatnot here in town or in the state, I get the same vibe. I get the same thing. Like they don't think their pedals are good enough or their guitars are worthy enough to be whatever, because they're just like, we're just small time. We're just here in Montana making these little boutique-y things. And that's where I was in 2016. I was trying to figure out How can we hang with, the big players out there? How can we be noticed like all these people that go to NAMM and whatnot? And so in 2017, when I went as the guest of Fuzzrocious, I walked around. That was my first NAMM experience. I'd never been to NAMM. I just would see stuff on YouTube and read stuff and talk to people. They'd always talk about it. And immediately, within minutes of being in NAMM, I suddenly had this feeling, it's like, I can hang with these people. Suddenly the brand that I thought was huge was, it's 3 dudes at this booth, and they're just super chill and cool. And I thought this was like a factory that was doing these, and
right.
They're doing it out of a small shop. And I'm like, wow, I totally misunderstood that. And then I go to another thing, and I'm like, wow, this is like, their story is just like mine when I'm talking to them. Like, they just started in their basement 4 years ago. Now they're here. And it really was inspirational. It was like, wow, we can do it. I can do it. I can, we have a team that we can all do it. And then 2018 rolls around, and we actually started developing our team. This is still in the basement of my house. 2019 rolls around, and one of the guys that work with us, he's still here today, is awesome. He just asked me, he was like, how come we don't go to NAMM? And I was like, well, it costs so much money, and I don't know. I don't even know like who would, and suddenly it was like right back to 2016 mentality. We're not good enough to be at NAMM. We're too small to be at NAMM. We're not, whatever. And then right when he said that, I was like, maybe we should just try to figure out how to go to NAMM. Let's figure it out. And then suddenly, right when I said that, those limits fell away. Suddenly it was like a possibility. It's just money. It's just logistics. It's, okay, we need a booth. What goes in the booth? Okay, let's start drawing it out. What do we need for the booth? We're cheap and poor, so let's figure out like how can we build everything for our booth?
Yeah.
Try to keep everything as down as cheap as possible, and then figure out our goals for NAMM. So 2019, all summer, we're building our booth material and our slat walls and kind of designing the whole thing and trying to figure out, okay, what's our pitch and how does this process work and how do we capture people that come to the booth, and we get all through it. So in 2020, we finally get there. I thought we had a great show. I thought we had really, really super positive interactions all day long. The thing I was mostly surprised about that I did not even consider in all this planning was meeting customers. And not once it crossed my mind. Like, I thought I was going to be just meeting dealers and dealer buyers and industry people like you and all that. I figured the whole day would be just around that. And I could not believe how many people came to the booth that were customers. And we're so excited to talk to us and, like connect. And that was like one of the first moments too, where I started seeing like, oh, having a stronger connection with our customers was really important. And so that was insanely positive. And when we got done with NAMM, I thought, oh, yeah, tons of dealer leads, captured a ton of emails to talk to them. A lot of, basically, yeah, we're going to buy, when you get back, send us the pricing and we'll send you a PO. It's just like a lot of that. And, as soon as, COVID was percolating, everyone was worried about anthrax, right? And
right. That was the least of our problems.
That was the least of it, yeah. And then, as soon as by like February, we were working out all of these basically POs and connecting with these dealers and kind of working out the details of orders and pricing. And then basically like March 1 was the first time suddenly it was like, oh, we're going to hold off spending. We'll wait for this COVID thing to blow over. And then we'll put that PO in for this. And I was like, okay. And then I would get a couple more of those. And then suddenly it became a thing. And then it was just like a complete shutdown of all of our dealer leads. So for us, it's really interesting because I'm an ROI guy. Everything I do is like, what's the return on that investment? Right. Yeah. I'm always, and at first it was like, oh, we already signed up for Summer NAMM when we got back. We already put the money in for that. we signed up for the Tacoma show for September of 2020, put money down for that. So our ROI at that moment was like super positive. It was like, oh, we're gonna like really level up once these POs come in, and that's our thing. We're gonna be doing shows. That's gonna be the thing. Like that's gonna be 2021. We're gonna be doing shows. We're gonna be NAMM every year, summer NAMM, and of course, I'm calling NAMM like, hey, I need a refund for that summer. We're not doing it, and we got the money, got our refund back from the Tacoma show. We put a full stop on everything. So now when I look back, I'm like, what was the ROI on NAMM? And years later, we picked up some of those dealers that were on the fence or holding off, and we got them. And so sometimes when I look at that, to me, my biggest ROI out of that whole thing was mentally convincing myself to level up this business to go to NAMM. That was step one, to say we could hang out, buy a 10x10, put the money down, get the Airbnb, pay for all the food and the plane tickets, get all that stuff dialed in, and make it happen. That was a major accomplishment. If I was going to do NAMM again, I don't know. I don't know if I ever would.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Right now, no, but next year, I don't know. Maybe. It all depends.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, so much similar stories to be, meeting the customers and meeting suppliers and dealers and people that, you get an order online and you see a name and you make your product and you ship it out, and then you don't actually know who those people are and what they do with it. And some of them will send you a follow-up note being like, hey, here's a shot of my rig, or thanks for making good products. Yeah. But sometimes you don't hear anything and you're just kind of doing your thing every month. And same for us. We had some pretty massive handshake deals at the NAMM show, some like pretty game-changing type deals for us, and very similar. Literally probably 95% of them just went into thin air after that, because they were, the people that were there also spent a bunch of money, and they're like, well, we need to get back and we need to get our POs, and then we'll like take that PO and a couple pretty big guitar companies were starting conversations with us, and they're like, man, we want to do something. Let's talk in May, because we kind of got Q1 and part of Q2 already figured out. Let's talk in May, and then we'll just be off and running. And then, by the time May rolled around, everyone was kind of wondering if they would still be in business, or they had to make some major changes, and man, I'm sorry to bring that up, but it's definitely one of those times where you take the risk, and yeah, I'm with you. I don't regret taking the risk. I think it cost us right around $15,000 to do the show with a crew and a house and shipping the crate and all that stuff, and that's like a pretty good chunk of change for a business our size to sort of take that one-time risk. Typically you're funneling some marketing money here and there, and over time maybe it gets to that total, over spread out instead of one shot, kind of like, here's this and we're going for it. And like you guys, we got some stores, over time, but even just being there and meeting the customers was really cool. And I want to touch on the kind of the Montana angle, because I'm with you, man. We get this like, oh, you guys are from Idaho. What's even going on in Idaho? And can anyone like even drive? Are there horses and carriages and
I've gotten those before.
Pioneers.
You got roads there, paved roads. Yeah, a bunch of them.
We do. Yeah. You even have a dial-up line that you're podcasting with me right now, right? Oh man, because we'll get that kind of like big shot attitude from New York or from California, and sometimes it's a guitar company that's like, oh man, do you guys even know what you're doing here? As like, man, I've made like tens and tens of thousands of pickups. I think I at least kind of have a general idea of what's going on, and then you do it like. You do it and they're like, man, these guys, it's like, why does where you live mean that you suck, or mean that you're lesser of an artist, right? I think that was a really profound thing you said, because even bands coming from a small town, or, we've got some friends that grew up in Alaska, and it was like, oh, well, you're just fishing and hunting, and what else could you
Yeah.
possibly do? And you have no
Well,
you have no skills beyond that, obviously, because you lived in Alaska, or whatever it might be.
yeah. I mean, to me, I love it when the outside does that to us. I love it. I mean, if you want to underestimate me all day, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll take that on all the time. What I hate is when it's internally, where when you think you're not good enough,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's a real. I mean, I can't. I mean, I'm telling you, every person I ever talk to that's not necessarily in your industry. I mean, unless it's anybody that's like making clothes or making a brand or anything, even on a like, oh, they got a podcast or something like that. There's always this kind of a hesitancy of, I could just see that, like, are we good enough? Can we get these people? Will people buy our thing? And I know that exists everywhere else. I mean, I know, people in LA go through the same problem,
Mm-hmm.
but there is like a systemic vibe of that from here. I mean, when I just always think of bands, it's, I'm also pre-internet Gen Xer, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
there's that point where for years in high school, I didn't see bands move. I only saw pictures of them, So when I would see, like, I'd go to a show and finally see, oh, that's my favorite band, and I actually see them move. I don't even get video. I don't get, there's such a weird thing of like so limited to exposure that it suppresses you down a little bit. And yeah, when I would just think of bands, it's when you'd be at a club and a band from LA would roll in or some big city, and of course they're on tour, so they're like tour ready. They've been playing for 40 days straight, and when you see them, you're just like, oh man, they are so tight and so good. I can't get over it. My band, we practice once a week, play 3 times a month, and we're not even close to those guys.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, we play once a week.
Yeah. Exactly.
And but those kind of feelings of like, and every band in Montana in the 90s, what's your goal? To move. You want to move to Portland, you want to move to Seattle, because that's the only chance you have to make it. And just those kind of fundamentals of like, you have to move to make it. You have to get out of the state to be a writer. You have to, and this is again pre-internet, pre-Spotify and all that stuff, where now those rules are quite different. But those are the rules that were burnt into my generation, and those are the people I see are making businesses and trying to do stuff too. So I have a lot of hope for millennials and Gen Xers or Gen Zers.
Yeah, that's really cool, and maybe in some strange way you could be an example of like staying put and making it go. And I think you already have been, and hopefully to many people just an inspiration to try something. And I think that's kind of the small business thing, as I'm a build it kind of guy, you're a build it kind of guy. We're always asking what if, how do we do this and how do we do that? And that has got us into this mess that we're currently in, right? Because my joke is that we're equally parts stubborn and stupid. But that's what it takes. People always ask, well, how did you get into this? How did you, I think it's completely off the wall that you can make money making pickups and cables and things like we do, right? But then the other day I had a guy come through the shop, and he has a friend who makes yo-yo strings and is absolutely killing it. And so I'm like,
crazy.
Well, I'm not weird anymore, Yeah, it's like, because I don't make yo-yo strings, but that's fascinating to me because it's no different. Like you said, it's no different. Like making a good product, taking care of the customers. It doesn't matter where you live, and that's what it was for us. The early days of Porter, it's like we want to be in a city and a town we're coming from Memphis, and we wanted to be in a city and a town that was safer to raise a family, that had more outdoor activities. And honestly, I could go get away, and my cell phone wouldn't work from time to time if I went to the right place. And I love it because I need to recharge, and I need to kind of reattack the business from different angles. I love that, man. That's super cool. And hopefully inspiring for those who are listening. And I'm going to hit you with kind of as we kind of get close to wrapping up the show here, I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions. We've been having fun with these. So you have no idea what's coming, and I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea what's coming because depending on your answers, there may be another question. So you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So your favorite gear company that is not Rattlesnake or Porter?
Oh, that's easy. Earthquaker.
Okay. Tell me why.
Why? Husband and wife team, just like us. Side note, it's our Amy and I's 29th anniversary today.
Way to go. And you're jumping on the Tonecast for your 29th anniversary. I don't know what to think about that.
Happy anniversary, Amy.
I'm going to podcast with my buddy in Idaho, right?
So yeah, Jamie, and those guys, I've been following them forever. So I remember when they were in the basement of their house, and I remember when they got into their first shop, and I remember when they got into their big shop, and knowing the yin yang personalities of the two, and how they complement each other's strengths and weaknesses has always been very similar to how Amy and I operate in this business. And so we always look to those guys to see how they're doing stuff. And, every time I've interfaced with them in 2017 NAMM and 2020, they've always been nothing but kind to us and supportive. And I just think they're just really inspirational company. And I also love the fact that they're, in Akron, Ohio. They could move that thing to anywhere. They could outsource to anything. And they really choose to bring in all their equipment and really try to support their community by hiring people. And those are like goals that we have here as well. So that's a lot of it checks. And of course, their stuff sounds great. I should say that too. One of my favorite pedals is Earthquaker Devices Dispatch Master.
Mm-hmm.
That I use that thing all the time in various bands. So
that's very cool. Yeah, and that's the thing, man. You just kind of gravitate towards people who are fighting the same fight as you, even if they're in a different spot, maybe numbers wise, it doesn't really matter. It's the same principle of just kind of doing it and working together. I mean, that's me and Kathleen. We've been at this thing kind of running it from the get go, and she does shipping orders and she orders parts and she handles kind of some customer service, and she's like one of the ways that this thing goes. And honestly, one of the ways that we've been able to make it all fit is just because we've kind of been a team and we're both equally invested in it, both in time and just our family, right? We're trying to make it all work. Okay, that's awesome. I love that. Good suggestion. Tell me a brand of guitars that you haven't played or haven't owned that you are really curious about.
When you say that, I have two things that come up in my brain. It's just really weird. So one's a lame answer, one's a cool answer. Ooh. So I've never owned a Telly.
Okay.
I've always wanted a Telly. That's the lame answer.
I'm going to shut down the podcast right now. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through different brands through the years, from Les Pauls. I was obsessed with Travis Beans for a good portion of my musical career. Then I went to Fenders for a lot. Currently, I play a lot of Fenders, Jazzmasters, Jaguars. Always wanted a Telly, never owned one. Rarely even played one. But for a brand that I'm that I'm always interested in and I've never owned, I've never even held one, but I've talked to them at 2020, is Dunnable. I think those guitars are awesome. They look so cool. A lot of bands I'm into also play them, so that's a great one.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That seems to be there's so many good people building good guitars now, and there's always that curiosity of, we did a lot more heavy guitar making as of a couple of years ago, and we're kind of slowly doing less of that. But I'm always interested in the boutique stuff and the kind of off the wall small builder stuff. It's always a little scary to take the plunge on those things, because you're like, well, if I haven't played it, I don't really know. But if you get a
Oh yeah.
chance and then you're smitten, then it's all over at that point, But
Yeah.
it's okay. Well, that's a good Dunnable. I haven't. I think we've had maybe a couple of them come through the shop, but not a lot of them. So I don't have a ton of experience. I remember seeing them at NAMM and stuff too. So that's definitely good. Okay, what about the digital? We just asked this to a recent podcast guest, but kind of your quick thoughts on the digital versus real amp conversation. Kind of where do you land on that? What do you use? Any strong opinions one way or another?
Yeah, kind of weird. I'm kind of processing this. Oh, good word at this moment. Processing my idea or my thoughts here.
Are you digitally processing it or analog?
Yes. I mean, I love real amps. I love real tube amps. I play matchless. That thing, every time I turn it on, plug a guitar into it, it just makes me smile. It makes my body react. I get like goosebumps on certain chords. It's like there's certain things that are just like, it's very, that amp in particular is insanely organic, and it just responds. I almost play the amp like I play the guitar. There's tricks with that amp that I want to get out of it, and I can pull it off just by how I'm hitting, what pedal is affecting it, how I'm aggressively hitting the strings. Does things for me where I hop on another amp. It doesn't do any of that. It doesn't feel like it. I've also played matchless plugins and emulators and stuff. It's close, but it's still not the same. But I think it's the future. This is what it's going to be. I mean, I'm getting old now, so I mean, that thing's like 45 pounds or just a head, and the idea of like, oh, if I just brought in, some kind of emulator that just pull off a live show, and it's like really, really light, some kind of a modeler pedal, and go into a really small power amp that's on my board, powering, either just going to the front of house or to the monitors, or like a little cab behind me or whatever. I can see the benefit of that and the appreciation of it. Recording, I can see all sorts of crazy stuff with that too. But personally, if I was going to play something, like I just want to play guitar in my basement, or I want to play guitar and really just have a fun time with it. And if I was going to be in the studio, I think I would want to have my amp. But there's also tons of people, like my son's just learning to play guitar, or he's actually plays really great guitar, but plays better than me, but has very limited gear. And, he's asking me like, what amp should I get? And that's like a weird loaded question for me, because if someone asks me, I'm like, oh, you got to get this, this, and this. But I know he doesn't have any money. And, I was just like, oh, maybe a Boss Katana, maybe get that Walrus pedal and a little, you know what I mean? Like run it through your PA and at your practice. Suddenly those options were never around when I was in bands. You had to get an amp, and you had to get an amp loud enough to get past the drummer, and then there's this whole volume thing at first, and then it was a tone thing on top of the volume thing, and so I think the rules have changed quite a bit, and stages are so different now. I mean, overall, I would say sound on stages is so much better, and sound guys walking around with iPads and dialing all this stuff all around you. And I'm like, man, this is so different than, in 1993, and everything's squealing, everything's on 10. And it's just like, you know what I mean? So it's like, you can get away with like quieter rigs or, whatever. So, and I'm also a guy that believes in this stuff is always shifting, right? I mean, I remember when digital was hot, when Zoom pedals were around, and that was going to be the killer of amps. And, it all comes and goes. I'm sure tube amps in 10 years from now will be like, oh, all of these, aux boxes and all this stuff are just like not cool, or Kempers, and they're not cool anymore. Now we're back to PVs, solid states where it's at.
Yeah, it's funny.
Who knows?
It's funny how that does shift and change. And you're right. We're living in a great time. It's almost too overwhelming as a guitarist, because we get that question, well, what are you using for this? And I'm like, well, a Strat is still a Strat, a Tele is still a Tele, right? But then what you plug it into from there is just like, okay, there's so many options that, I've got some pedals that I can pull out my iPad and change it from a drive to a fuzz with a push of a button.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, this is crazy. This is like a different era of musicians and tone tools and it's a good thing. It's also overwhelming.
It's
like you
tools,
said.
was what you said.
Yeah.
That's to me the thing. They're just tools, and whatever gets the job done. So I think there's what can get the job done, and what I'm like I was saying with my amp, I'm almost like a hi-fi audiophile with their crazy tube preamp and turntable and whatever. I look at that and go, you guys are crazy. You guys spent $10,000 on a record player, right? But I get the concept when I'll say the same thing about my amp. Someone's like, "It has a $4,000 head. Why do you have that? You can get that in a $200 pedal now." Well, yeah, but it gives the physicality of that thing gives me joy, just like the hi-fi audiophile with his $10,000 turntable does, right?
Yeah.
So there's always that too. There's a little bit of like, I have it. I'm not going to go sell my matchless and go buy, a new computer and a bunch of digital stuff. I have it. Maybe if this was 10 years ago, before I was going to buy the matchless, maybe this would be a different conversation. But I got it, so I'm going to use it, and I love it.
Yes, that's great. That's awesome. Okay, one last question as we wrap up here, and this is a hypothetical. So, we're not broadcasting this, and there's anything behind this question. It's more of, I'm just curious. So, say a company in the gear industry was hiring, and they offered you a job. Obviously, you would stay with Rattlesnake, most likely. But what company would you give a second thought to, or maybe even go interview for if they said, "Hank, would you come work for us?"
That's a hard question. To do what? Like to make cables, or to like marketing, or
anything in the industry? Just the company that you're like, man, I like these guys. I would work for them if Rattlesnake just closed down tomorrow. Let's just put that caveat in there.
Yeah, I guess obviously it would have to be a different career. I don't think I would ever do a lateral move in the sense of like, oh, you're going to do product development and solder and build gear from product, development. I don't think I would ever do that. But if it was something else, like say marketing, like, I love marketing, or customer relationships, definitely not sales. But, again, I'd probably think about like, maybe Earthquaker. I feel like from the outside looking in, I feel like it seems like a cool place, but who knows?
Yeah. I didn't mean to make it like awkward there, but just something I thought about, someone
That's
asked,
an interesting question.
I'm not offering you a job either. It's just one of those things where, someone asked me the other day, well, if Fender called and wanted you to run their pickup department, would you do it? And I was like, I would probably just do the whole interview process just because it would be probably a great experience, but I wouldn't want to go work for Fender. I kind of like working for myself, right? And it just that was one of those things that I'm like, I've never really thought of it that way. There was probably 6 or 7 years ago that someone was interested in buying our business, and I'd never even thought of that being an option. And so that made me think just differently about how we operate and what we do. And of course, I wasn't interested at the time, but it was just one of those weird situations you get put in. And you're like, that would be kind of interesting. But
my thing too is, just like you, I've been working on my own businesses since 2003. So the last time I was employed by anybody else was 2003, 2002. So 2003 is when I started my first business. So to me, that's a weird one too, because it's just like the thought of working for someone would be really difficult.
Yeah.
I'm with
you. Yeah.
There was that adage too about entrepreneurs. You kind of touched on it, where it's like an entrepreneur is a person who decides to work 80 hours a week to avoid working 40 hours a week for someone else.
It's called living the dream, my friend, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation, man. It's so good to kind of catch up again. And I know that Yeah, we're just out there hustling and delivering the products. Again, man, just can't highly recommend Rattlesnake Cables enough. Just love what you guys are doing over there. And yeah, if you are in town at our shop, we've got some hanging around the shop if you want to check them out.
Nice.
But man, it's just great to have you on the show. And we'll include some links to your website below. And appreciate your time, Hank. And yeah, enjoyed the conversation. We'll do it again soon.
Yep, that sounds good.
All right, man. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks.